David Smock is the Senior Vice President of the Centers for Innovation and Director of the Religion and Peacemaking Center. Previously, he served as Director of the USI Peace Grant Program and Coordinator for African Activities. He has worked on African issues for more than 30 years and lived in Africa for 11 years as a staff member of the Ford Foundation from 1964 to 1980. He served in Ghana, Kenya, Lebanon, Nigeria, and New York. From 1980 to 1986, Smock served concurrently as Director of the South African Education Program, a scholarship program that brings black South African students to the United States universities. And he was also Vice President for Program Development and Research for the Institute of International Education. After serving as Executive Associate to the President of the United Church of Christ from 1986 to 1989, Smock became Executive Director of International Voluntary Services, supervising the development projects in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. He received an MDiv from New York Theological Seminary and a PhD in anthropology from Cornell University. So we welcome our honorable guest, Mr. David Smock. You're welcome.
Thank you. Let me say a word to start about what U.S. Institute of Peace is. There was in the late 70s and early 80s a nationwide campaign to create a peace academy. This was largely a church-based campaign, and the argument that was being made was that there are academies to teach people how to make war at West Point, at Annapolis, and Colorado Springs. There ought to be an academy to teach people how to make peace. So this finally came up to congressional level, and there was a select committee of Congress that was established to explore this idea and make recommendations, chaired by the Reverend Andrew Young. And he held hearings around the country to decide whether this was a good idea. And the conclusion of those exploratory hearings was that, well, it's a good idea to have the U.S. government fund an institute that would be making peace, but to establish an academy like a West Point or an Annapolis would be competitive with other universities that have peace studies programs. So we were created as an institute, not a degree-granting institution. And one of the requirements in our legislation is that 25% of our annual appropriation from Congress will go to grants. Much of that money goes to colleges and universities. That's what the colleges and universities wanted. They didn't want competitive institution. They wanted an institution that was going to be supportive of their programs. And so that's the way we worked out a compromise with the colleges and universities. So the Institute was created in 1984. This was the period of Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan had no interest at all in a peace institute. So the sponsors of the legislation attached it as an amendment to the Defense Authorization Bill, knowing that if the Defense Authorization Bill would be approved, and there was no way that Ronald Reagan was going to veto the whole Defense Authorization Bill just to get rid of a little pipsqueak institute called the U.S. Institute of Peace. So that's how we are established. And every year we get an appropriation from Congress. We have our own line item in the congressional appropriations. And every year we struggle with the appropriation process. Since the Tea Party came in and there's been so much talk about deficit reduction, we've been struggling to maintain a budget that keeps us viable. We took a 20% cut in 2011 and a little bit more in 2012. So we're struggling, but we still have a lively program. In about 1990, David Little who retired recently as a professor at Harvard Divinity School, and earlier had been at the Peace Institute as a senior fellow. David established a program at the Institute called Religion, Ethics, and Human Rights. And he set up working groups to look at conflict zones like Lebanon, like Israel, like Philippines, Sri Lanka, Ukraine. And they were to explore how religion causes conflict. And he published some books based upon the working groups on these different conflict zones. Then in 2000, or 1999, David went off to Harvard Divinity School, and we had to decide as an institute whether to continue our work on religion or not. It's a bit of an anomaly to have a government-sponsored institution with a religion department. So we wanted to decide whether we should continue or not. So, given my interest in religion, I was named to a small committee that explored this. The other two members on the committee was one of the vice presidents, who was a Quaker, and a woman who was executive vice president, who was a former nun. And we recommended two things. One, we should continue to have a religion program, that it was in fact an advantage to have a government, semi-government institution that had a religion program. And secondly, that we should not focus so much on religion as a source of conflict, but rather turn it around and look at religion as a source of peacemaking. And the board of the Institute accepted that recommendation, and that's what happened. So in 1990, I raised my hand and I said I would like to direct this program. So I was made director, not in 1990, in 2000 I was made director of the program. To go back one or two steps, I just want to say another word about the status of the Institute. We're created by Congress, we're funded by Congress, but I don't work for the U.S. government. I'm not a civil servant for the government, not part of the executive branch. The President of the United States names board of directors. They have to be confirmed by the Senate. But once the board of directors is constituted, they have free rein to set policy, to establish programs, to review what's going on. So we are a government institution and we're not a government institution, and sometimes we play both sides of the road. When we want to be an NGO, we say we're an NGO. When we want to be a government institution, we say we're a government institution. But I think everybody recognizes we're neither one or the other. We're somewhere in between. What I thought I'd do is to describe two previous projects some time ago in our history, and then turn and look at our contemporary activities. In the summer of 2001, the chief Palestinian Sheikh Tal al-Sidr, and the chief rabbi of Israel. There are two chief rabbis of Israel, one for Ashkenazis and the other for the Sephardi's. And they came to me and said, we would like to come to Washington, to the Peace Institute, and declare a religious peace, a religious truce between Israel and Palestine. We know we're not going to make peace by ourselves. We're religious leaders, we're not political leaders. But we think if religious communities in our two areas are supportive of a peace process, that could move the process forward. Well, it didn't happen. Prime Minister Ariel Sharon did not approve of this, and the chief rabbi felt he shouldn't get out in front of the government. And secondly, Tal al-Sidr, who was previously a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, was not given a visa to come to this country. If you can imagine somebody who's coming to make peace between Israel and Palestine and he couldn't get a visa to come to this country. It's a sad commentary on our visa regulations, which still hold even today. But then they went to the Archbishop of Canterbury and said the same thing to him. And he set up a conference in Alexandria, Egypt, in January of 2002, and brought together top religious leaders, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, from Israel and Palestine. The Christians were well represented. And they signed what was called the Alexandria Declaration, which was a very impressive document that declared that the religious communities were ready to make peace, and that they wanted the political leaders to move forward on a peace process. So there was the declaration, which had some influence on thinking in Israel and Palestine, but then the members of the delegates to the Alexandria Declaration came to meet in Jerusalem every month, and we became their primary supporters. And they talked about how they could advance the peace process when there was something outrageous that happened. Some mosque had been destroyed by Israelis, or Muslims or Christian Palestinians had defaced the synagogue or done something comparable to that. Why the Alexandria participants would make a statement and would go and try to seek reconciliation between the communities. This went on for about 8 years, and then 2 other organizations have been spun off from the Alexandria process. One is Mosaica, which is run by a very impressive Rabbi Michael Melchior, who used to be the deputy foreign minister of Israel. And the other one is a council for the religious organizations of the Holy Land, which brings together the top leaders of the different religious bodies in Israel and Palestine. And they carry on a similar process. They've recently engaged in a project that we're quite interested in, which is an assessment of textbooks in Israel and in Palestine, and whether the Palestinians give a fair portrayal of the Israelis, or whether the Israelis give a fair portrayal of the Palestinians. And they're going to launch that report in another couple of months. Another project I want to talk about is in Nigeria, where I spent 4 years living many years ago. And there is in Nigeria a evangelical pastor, Pentecostal pastor named James Uwe, and a conservative Muslim imam named Muhammad Ashafa. And they were involved in religious warfare. They were trying to kill each other, and they each had militias that were out to kill those on the other side. And the pastor lost his right arm in this fighting, and the imam had 2 of his cousins killed in the fighting. But through various mutual friends that brought them together, and they got to know each other, and the imam came to visit the pastor's mother when she was sick in the hospital, and they both had an epiphany about the same time, that both their religions were religions of peace and not religions of war. And they came together and formed the Interfaith Mediation Center. And yes, Interfaith Mediation Center. And I've been working with them for the last 10 years in a whole variety of projects on trying to improve interfaith relationships. And in 2005, I had read in the newspaper that there were killings in Jos, not in Jos, but in Plateau State. Jos is the capital, in a village called Inshar. And 1,000 people have been killed just in a matter of a couple of weeks. Mostly Christians killing Muslims. And I approached the pastor and imam and I said, why don't you offer yourselves as mediators to try to bring the two sides together? Try to bring the two sides together and bring peace between the Muslims and Christians in Shar. So they said that's a good idea, and they went to meet with the governor of Plateau State, and he had tried an earlier effort to mediate between the two sides and had been unsuccessful. And so he said, go ahead and try on your own. And then they went and did a research project in Shar to see what the causes of the conflict were. And it's true of so many conflicts that appear to be between two religious groups, there were actually many other factors involved that led to the conflict. It just happened that these other causes overlapped with Christian and Muslim identities, so that they were mobilized as Christians and Muslims, but actually it was conflicts over who gets position, who gets scholarships, who gets positions in local authority, and so on. So then in November of 2004, I went out to join them, and we went to Anshar, and we had a week-long mediation process. And we divided up the two groups. There were 25 representatives from the Christians, 25 representatives from the Muslims. And they met separately. The imam worked with the Muslims and the pastor worked with the Christians. And they wanted to know, what is it that, ask the Muslims, what is it that you like about the Christians? And what is it you don't like about the Christians? And ask the comparable question of the Christians. And talked about the causes of the conflict. And then each side selected 10 people to come together to meet together between the Christians and Muslims. And they asked the Christians to speak first about what are your complaints about the Christians, about the Muslims. And the Christian leader got up and started talking about, well, the Muslim youth had thrown stones at our Christian chief, didn't respect our chief. The Muslims want to put a mosque in the marketplace, and that's no place to put a mosque. And they went on and on through a litany of complaints about all the things that the Muslims had done to the Christians. It was a very tense atmosphere. There were police surrounding the whole meeting to make sure that there was no violence. And so then it was the turn of the Muslim leader to get up and speak. And he got up and he stood and he remained silent for a couple of minutes. And then he said, all the things you have accused us of are true. We did all those things. And we ask for your forgiveness. The Christians were blown away. They had never expected that the Muslims would admit their shortcomings and ask for forgiveness. So what could the Christians do but get up and say, we ask forgiveness from you for all the things that we have done. So over the course of a week, there was a peace agreement drawn up on all the issues that they were divided on. And in January of 2005, the governor came and religious leaders came, and there was a grand celebration that there was a peace agreement which is held since then to bring peace to Anshar. And we have sponsored a DVD that I believe Dale is going to show in the May conference, describing this process and celebrating the peace that was made in Anshar. And then we wanted to do a DVD that would show the methodology that the pastor and imam used to make peace. So we sent them to Kenya. And there was severe violence in 2007 and 2008 after the last elections in Kenya. And the pastor and imam went to the Rift Valley, where many of the killings had happened. And they did a peace process there, and we had a videographer go with them and record the whole process. And so there's another DVD that has come out called An African Answer, which documents the methodology that they used to make peace in the Rift Valley of Kenya. And now they're back in Kenya because Kenya is going to have another election next spring in March. And they're going to be using this DVD and meeting with people around the country to try to help them avoid electoral violence this time around. So let me turn to our current. Anybody have any questions so far they want to ask? Let me turn to our current activities. We have three principal goals in what we undertake. One is to develop religious leaders as peacemakers. The second is to combat religious extremism. And the third is to promote peaceful interfaith relationships. And I'll give you a couple examples of how we're trying to develop religious leaders as peacemakers. One of the things we have focused on is try to build up women as religious peacemakers. In so many parts of the world that religions are dominated by men, and even the peacemaking activities are primarily a male enterprise. So we have tried to lift up stories of women as religious peacemakers and have done training to teach women how to be peacemakers. And we've done this particularly in Colombia. And we have brought Catholic and Protestant women peacemakers together to share experiences, to learn from each other, and to join in joint activities to make peace in Colombia, where, as you may have read recently, there is now an official peace process underway with the Marxist terrorist group that had caused so much trouble over the last 20 years. And we have trained the women and brought them together for seminars so that they have developed joint programs for peacemaking in Colombia. We're now working in Burma to explore how religious leaders can be peacemakers in Burma, newly opening up opportunities in Burma, which has been such a closed society, and now there are new opportunities to engage in democracy building and peacemaking. There are various rebellions underway in Burma. If you haven't followed the news in Burma, not many people follow the Burmese news, but the population is basically Buddhist, but there are minority groups, particularly in the highlands, that have been Christianized. So it's not a religious conflict, but the Christians in the highlands want to have more autonomy than they have now from the central government. So it has a religious overtone because of the Buddhist-Christian differences. And then there's a whole part of Burma which is Muslim. And recently, within the last several weeks, there has been an uprising among the Muslims and a fighting back from the Buddhists to put the Muslims, to try to deny citizenship to the Muslims. The whole Muslim population has been there for decades, and the Buddhists are trying to deprive them of citizenship. So there are religious elements, and we're going to bring together religious leaders from the various communities to talk about peace building and how religious leaders can develop. Religious organizations in Burma up till now have focused primarily on humanitarian assistance, but have done very little with peacemaking. So we're going to try to encourage them to get more involved and do training so that they can be more effective. Just in the past 2 weeks, we have taken a delegation of Sufi sheikhs from Pakistan to go to Turkey to engage in an intensive 2-week training program in how to do mediation and how to do peacemaking. I have on my staff a Pakistani American who organized this program and was the principal trainer for the Pakistanis in Turkey, but there were also Turkish trainers as well. And so for 2 weeks they were involved in an intensive training program, offering opportunities for these Sufi sheikhs to engage in local level mediation and peacemaking once they're back in Pakistan. And we've worked extensively in Sri Lanka, where there are 4 basic religious communities, again predominantly a Buddhist society, but there are Hindus, there are Christians, and there are Muslims. And in all these places that we work with local organizations. We don't just come in on our own. We try to identify a problem that we want to work on, identify a local partner we can work with, help the local partner. The local partner does most of the work. We provide the financial assistance, and we work together as collaborators together. And that's what we've done in Sri Lanka. And brought together, again, I don't know how much you know about the religious history of Sri Lanka, but while Buddhism is considered to be a religion of peace, among the most nasty and vicious of the religious chauvinists in Sri Lanka have been Buddhist monks. Not exclusively. I mean, there are many Buddhists who are very peaceful and want to make peace between the different communities, but there's been this Tamil rebellion insurrection in northeastern Sri Lanka that's gone on for many years, and they are predominantly Hindu and Christian. And the Buddhist monks have been those that have argued vociferously for a military solution to the problem, which in fact is the way it turned out, that the central government defeated the Tamil rebels militarily and have suppressed the Tamil population. But we have worked with our local partner to bring together the 4 communities to engage in interfaith dialogue and to try to develop these leaders as peacemakers. Then on our efforts to combat religious extremism, again going back to the pastor and imam that I described before, there is an organization in Nigeria called Boko Haram, which is a very vicious Islamic sect, which has killed hundreds, even thousands of people. Mostly Christians, but also Muslims. They've killed government officials, they've killed police officers. They attacked the UN headquarters in Abuja, the capital of Nigeria. And doesn't seem to be any easy solution to the problem. They have an agenda that they want to kick out all the Christians from northern Nigeria and make it exclusively Muslim country and break off from the rest of Nigeria. They want a strict Sharia introduced. And they don't trust the Muslim leaders any more than they trust the Christian leaders, because they think the Muslim leaders have sold out to the Christians. So I went to the pastor and imam and said, is there anything you think you can do in trying to reach out to Boko Haram? So they had a 6-month program that just wound up last month. And they had television programs, they had radio programs, they had workshops, they had conferences. And they tried to reach out to some of the people in Boko Haram who were on the margins, who might be less radical, they might be able to talk to, and try to convince them that the kind of Islam that they were espousing is not an authentic Islam. And we will work with them again to expand this program in the future. I can't say we've undermined Boko Haram, but the purpose of the program is to try to delegitimize Boko Haram by convincing them and others that it's not an authentic Islam that they're preaching. There's a new institution in Abu Dhabi that is being set up both with the Abu Dhabi United Arab Emirates government and with other donors from around the world to counter violent extremism. And they have come to us to ask if we would develop curriculum materials and teach courses at this institute in Abu Dhabi. So we have agreed to do that. And some of the courses will be on religion. And again, trying to delegitimize extremism and to teach an authentic Islam that is a religion of peace. You've probably heard in many places that madrasas, the religious schools, Islamic schools in most Muslim countries have madrasas, that they often are the hotbed for training of extremists and radicals. But we have found that there are many madrasas that are not tuned into that kind of ideology. And we have worked in the Philippines, in Indonesia, and in Pakistan to develop teaching materials for madrasas that teach an Islamic basis for tolerance, for peace building, for gender equality, for environmental sensitivity. And the textbooks that have been developed, they've been developed in Urdu in Pakistan, the local language, in Bahasa, Indonesia, and in the Philippines it's been English because that's the lingua franca. And we brought together curriculum development people from madrasas from all over South and Southeast Asia to develop teaching materials for madrasas and to work together and to train teachers how to use these teaching materials. So we're continuing to work, particularly in Pakistan, to advance that program. And then finally, an effort to promote peaceful interfaith relationships. One of the most exciting things we're involved in is in Iraq, where the Council of Representatives, which is like the Iraqi Parliament, has a religious committee. And they are interested in setting up an interfaith council. It would be an official Iraqi government body that would promote interfaith relations in Iraq. And as you know, there's so many conflicts, not only against the minority religious groups, the Christians and others, but between Sunni and Shia. And this would be a center which would bring together the different religious groups and engage in dialogue and peacemaking. And one of the things we've done is to do a research project and prepared an extensive report on interfaith councils in other countries in the world to give to the Iraqis. We've translated into Arabic so that they can have an idea of what their council might do and the problems and the opportunities that presents for itself. And just recently, with all the difficulties in Muslim countries reacting to the video that went viral on YouTube, we thought we'd be pushed back in Iraq on this project, but no, the Iraqis are still very interested in working with us to promote this project. And we've worked, I mentioned Rabbi Melchior in Israel and his Mosaica Center, and we are working with him. He's working with Muslim imams and Jewish rabbis, mostly Orthodox rabbis, to bring them together to engage in dialogue, to develop teaching materials for the respective religious schools that do not demonize the other side. And it's a very exciting project, and we're happy to partner with them. And then finally, we've worked on Sunni-Shiite relationships in Pakistan, where there's been so much tension between those two subgroups within Islam. Dale was asking me before whether I had publications to recommend. I'll just read off the titles of several publications that might be of interest. One of these is a book. All the others are available on our website free of charge, so any one that you might be interested in, I can give you the website address. Building Interreligious Faith, Trust in a Climate of Fear. Teaching about the religious other. Islam and Democracy. What does Islam teach about democracy? What works? Evaluating interfaith dialogue programs.
Could you slow down just a little?
Okay. What works? Evaluating interfaith dialogue programs. Ijtihad. Reinterpreting Islamic Principles for the 21st Century.
Why don't you send them to me when we get done, and I'll make sure to post them.
Okay, all right.
Read them up, and I'll send them. I'll post them up.
And this is the book that I mentioned, done by my Muslim colleague, Crescent and Dove, Peace and Conflict Resolution in Islam. Then Women in Religious Peacebuilding, and Religious Contributions to Peacemaking when Religion Brings Peace and Not War. And we've done many more, but those are just some of a sampling of kinds of things.
Maybe I can have
I'll take your page and copy.
Okay.
Anything
So
else
these
that
are
you
available on the website for
USIP.
For USIP.
And the website is www.usip.org. Very simple. usip.org. I should mention that also on our website we have an online course on religious peace building. This is something NYTS could make use of in any of your courses.
Yes, definitely.
You can just log on to the course, and in a matter of 4 or 5 hours you can finish the course. There's a test at the end of it. You can get a certificate indicating you successfully completed the course. But it might be of real interest to students here. And one other resource is that I have a listserv on religion and peacemaking, and I send out messages every 2 weeks on issues relating to religious peace building. The last one I sent out 2 weeks ago was on Muhammad's teachings relating to peace and conflict that my Muslim colleague had put together. And I'll be putting out another one soon on speeches that the Deputy Secretary of State and the Special Envoy for against anti-Semitism gave last week on Holocaust, some history on the Holocaust, and what the U.S. government did and did not do, mostly did not do, to try to protect Jews during World War II who were trying to come to this country from Europe. But that's just a sampling of the kinds of things. Or if there's a book that's come out that I think is worth recommending to people, I will review the book and recommend it on my listserv. But that's something, if you want to send me an email, my email address is ds, my initials ds, @usip.org. And anybody who sends me an email,
Right behind you.
anybody who sends me an email, I can sign you up for the listserv. So I'll stop there and see if you have comments or questions. And